things sometimes that sound
I said financial cost as one of the many was enormous. It was a God experience. I just wanted to find God.
Simply feeling like you're inspired isn't always so.
Tell us about the solution.
As one of
People
the
with
many
18 to 35 years of age start out at work.
hey, I don't have the skill for this particular problem to solve this particular problem.
None of us talked about the bread seller.
Hello and welcome to the Heart of the Matter. My name is Omotayo. Now, Nigeria is a country with diverse cultures. It has a rich heritage and there are over 250 ethnic groups in this country alone, which is much more than a lot of other countries can boast of. And despite the fact that there is a lot of increased interest in Africa and Nigeria, the focus seems to be on Lagos alone and not in the rest of the country. Now that brings to question the function of tourism, the purpose of tourism, and how we can tap into that sector to develop the country as a whole, to kind of take the country to this next step, especially in this season of transition. Today, we're speaking with Dr. Adunola Okupe, a tourism advisor and researcher working on tourism development for West Africa. You don't want to miss this. All right, Adun, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Now, see, I call you Adun, but really what I should have said was Dr. Adunola Okupe.
Yes.
How does that feel?
That feels good.
That feels good. Tell us about the PhD. Why did you want to get a PhD?
Okay, right. Why did I want to get a PhD? So when I was in university, my first degree at the University of Kiel, I did a degree in economics and management, and I really loved research, right? And I wanted to go into...
You love research.
I love research, yes. I wanted to go into research, but I had a careers advisor that said that I should get a job first, work for a few years, and see that if I still wanted to do a PhD, then I should continue. And so I worked in London. I trained as a chartered accountant. I worked at KPMG in London for a few years, but I still wanted to really understand more about research, and I was always trying to say, why are we doing what we're doing? And so I did a master's in development studies and at SOAS, and tourism had always been something that called me because I like traveling, I enjoy travel, and I'd seen what could happen in places like Italy, Spain, Dubai, and it was more about just the potential for tourism in Africa, and so that's why I did a PhD in tourism, tourism leadership actually at the University of Surrey, which I finished in 2014, then did a postdoc at the University of Edinburgh, where I worked on the Afrocapitalism Research Project, trying to understand the role of leadership, business leadership in societal change in Africa. So that's the answer to your question.
That's a couple of mouthfuls of things that you went to do. You like school?
I love education and research. Research is key.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so you said tourism and then leadership.
Yes.
What do those two words have to do with each other?
Well, if you look at the fact that to make any change in any society, you can either look at either the grassroots level or you can start at the top. And the level that you can have the most impact, I think it's easier to start at the top with the top. Okay. And so for me, leadership is one of the key elements of any transformational change. Right. And so for me, trying to influence the tourism industry in Africa, in West Africa, in Nigeria, it's saying actually how do our leaders understand it, those that are in positions of power. Because whatever impact you have at the grassroots level is really limited unless you also convert or convince those at the top.
Right.
So that's why there's a focus on leadership.
So you're trying to take the idea of tourism and kind of pitch it to leaders.
No, we're trying to say that if we want to change society for the better, so the whole of society, regardless of any industry, we need to have leaders that are committed to societal change. Yes. Now, the lens through which I do that is tourism, right? And so it's saying that, okay, so if we're trying to influence tourism industry, it has a lot of relationships with other industries, for example, like transportation, housing, on urban planning, aviation. So it's not just the hotels that make tourism, it's a whole holistic perspective. And so you have to talk to leaders about that as well. You know, you have agriculture. So the people that are in charge of agricultural policies have to understand the tourism elements. Those are in charge of health, for example, have to understand the tourism elements of that as well. So that's why tourism.
Wow, it's like 100 questions just flashed through my mind as you said that.
I like that.
Yeah. So, okay, let's focus on health.
Okay.
Right, because health is, people are dying and they don't have money for hospital, and then the hospital has no lights, so you can't even get treated.
Of course.
What would you then do from your perspective, or what would you recommend, or what kind of partnership would you suggest between tourism, like when you're speaking to leaders,
Yeah.
from your tourism perspective, what
Yeah.
would you contribute?
Well, I think if you look at so again, if you look at a certain demographic in Nigeria now, that even if you have a headache or you have anything that you have to check your, do a whole blood check, body checkup, you have to travel either to the UK or to the States, or sometimes now they go to India. So that's health tourism, because they're traveling to these countries to partake in their health industry that is better developed. Now, just have a think about what would happen if all of that money was retained in the country. So, for example, if we looked at enhancing what we already have, we have hospitals already. We have hospitals that were built in the 1970s, 1960s that just need a bit of maintenance and a bit of, changing the mindset of those that work there. What will also happen is that it will also stem the brain drain. So we have a lot of doctors and nurses that are going to Canada, that are going to UK, that are going to the States, again, to work in the health industry in these countries. So for me, I would look at, if I wanted to look at health, it's actually, even if we're not saying that we want people to come from outside of Nigeria to come for health tourism purposes, even just having domestic people also being able to stay in the country to have better health care. That's kind of the perspective that I would want to share, and see how we can develop the talent and harness this talent so that they don't also have to travel. And also, just if you think about the fact that if you have an emergency now, the first option, alternative that most people think of is having to fly abroad. That's a real health risk, because a lot of things can happen in 6 hours, 7 hours, 8 hours, 10 hours. And so trying to rethink and say that, okay, if all of us, instead of spending $1,500,000 naira to buy a ticket and also to then spend a lot of money to go to Harley Street or wherever you go for your health interventions, and say, how do we develop this here? Just thinking about that is mind-boggling as to why we don't see it.
Do it already.
Yes.
Right. It's like there's so many opportunities, even beyond job creation, even beyond the minor things that we're always complaining about. There are so many opportunities already existing that if we just kind of plugged into them, there will be such a huge...
No, exactly. And also, even if we're saying that we take tourism seriously, so like the World Economic Forum do this Travel and Tourism Competitiveness Index, and talk about 14 pillars that would enable a tourism destination to be more competitive. And hygiene and health is one of the pillars. And so it's also saying that if you say tourism is important, I know Lagos State is really focusing on tourism right now. If your health and hygiene levels are quite low, right? When people come to your country, how safe do they feel? If they had to have an emergency, if they had to, a lot of things, anything can happen. And so that is something that even if we're saying also we want to do health tourism, but we also want to even attract other tourists to come for our culture, our heritage, how do we make them feel safe, that if anything goes wrong, that they're in safe hands? These are another thing we should think about.
I love it. Okay, so, because even I'm like thinking like, oh, that's true. Like we can say come to Nigeria, but then when you come and you catch a cold, or you get malaria,
or even worse, or you go on a boat and you fall down and something happens. So malaria, I think we're fine with it. But if anything happens, and I'm not trying to, be a rumor monger or saying that things can happen that are bad, but things can happen that are bad. And what do we have to do? What can we do? What can we do?
What can we do? Can we do? That's a big. Literally, that's like a placard. For what can we do?
So we need to really think about this in a more intentional way.
Yeah, I really like that. And I like how in this whole conversation, because, we started off the episode talking about the idea of tourism and Nigeria being attractive, but then I talked about the health sector and you said health tourism. What other, branches of tourism? Because it almost looks like tourism is in everything.
Of course. Tourism is a very multifaceted industry, and that's why I'm also saying that looking at leadership helps you to see things, better or clearly. I think if you look at the real agricultural burst or boom, I wouldn't call it a boom, but really that we're looking at agriculture now. You can also look at agro-tourism, for example. You can say that people, I know that when I was studying, for example, I wanted to go and work in Argentina to work on a farm. I know that you can work on a farm in Kenya. You can go and enjoy either the coffee plantation or flower plantations while you're also working. And so for me, I think that if we're looking at agriculture, we have all of these lands that we want to develop. We can look at also having chalets on them, right? So people can come and work, but also experience nature and tranquility and serenity. So that's one. Well, cultural tourism, I think that's obvious. There's another one that's a bit more provocative, which is dark tourism.
Dark tourism.
Dark tourism.
Okay, wait,
I won't talk about that.
No. Let's hold up on that. I want to hear about dark tourism. But we have to take a break. So just give us a second and we'll come back to this dark tourism thing.
Okay.
All right, so we'll take a quick break and we'll be right back with Dr. Adunola Okupe.
Rejoice! 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 Rejoice!
Welcome back to the Heart of the Matter. We are still here with Dr. Adunola Okupe talking about tourism. And before we went on that break, you hinted a little something called dark tourism.
Yes.
Can you tell us more about that?
Well, okay, I'll talk about a little bit about dark tourism, but then I'll move to what I really want to talk about. But dark tourism really just talks about how, there are these elements of fear and fascination and fantasy in our culture and heritage, right? And some of it are, about masquerades and about rituals and customs, and so there really is there's a boom now around the world on dark tourism. We have it in Mexico. We have it in India, and it's also coming to Africa. But what we are looking at in Africa is really more the fantastical element of it. I know they spoke about it at Ake Festival that we had recently. So it's moving from the dark label to more about fantasy and fantastical and mythology and deities that we have. But another element of tourism that I also want to talk about is adventure tourism.
Okay.
And why is that? It's because a lot of the infrastructure that we have available right now on the continent and in the sub-region are not as developed as they should be. And so the appeal or the attraction is for tourists that don't mind a bit of not knowing, going into the unknown, a bit of bumpy roads, a bit of insects.
Like, I just want to feel what it's like to have a mosquito bite.
Well, maybe not mosquitoes. I was thinking more like sandflies, but it more like think that adventure tourism is somewhere that we can really develop, because that would also enable us to harness our resources in the rural area. And so I think those are part of the low-hanging fruit. So you don't really have to have luxury resorts. Not that there isn't space for that, but we can really say that, okay, how is living in a rural community like?
So it's like we can package it as an adventure rather than, oh, there's no running water here. It's
Exactly.
like, oh, I went to this cool African country where
We had wells, we had to use clay pots.
it's like, oh my God, it was so cool. That kind of.
I mean, I want to do that. I really want to go and stay in the north and live in like a,
Like a
hut,
hut.
and just because I remember when I went to Accra, and there's this house by this architect, Joe Ado, and he runs a design B&B, and they built it from clay and wood, no air conditioner, everything is naturally ventilated, and it really works with the elements of the sun and light and sunlight. And I sometimes I wonder, why do we build the way we build here with concrete? But we're moving into something. Well, actually, I didn't feel hot at all in that house, and we had ceiling fans that helped with the ventilation, and I was there for 4 days, and it was perfect. And so for me, I think if we look at how we have lived for centuries, right, and we see how we have lived well, I'm not saying that we cannot, develop and move on and improve and be more modern, but what does modernity mean? And so we're moving into something else, and I think that's important for also our culture. It's like, what does modernity mean? What does development mean?
Right.
What does tourism development mean? We don't have to be Dubai, we don't have to be Italy, we don't have to be Spain.
Like, we can carve out an identity of our own.
We have to, because Italy is different from Spain, which is different from Dubai, which is different from Kenya. So why do we want to mirror them when they have? India is fascinating, it's very different. Singapore, Japan, I mean, all these countries.
So what do you say to people who say things like, if this was any other country, we wouldn't do this and this? Because people say that as a way of comparing to show that that is better.
Yes.
So if we try to maintain our own and work with our own, how do we mix the two? Because obviously, in the movie Black Panther, the roads were not paved.
No.
And for me, that was that was amazing. There was a movie about an African country that's technologically advanced and it's working, but the roads are not paved. However, we have this mindset that if the road is not paved, then there's a problem with the country.
Well, I think paved roads are more comfortable to drive on. So that's what I would say.
Unless we're flying in spaceships like they were
exactly,
in Black Panther.
Exactly.
Right, but then, so this adventure tourism that comes and kind of romanticizes poverty, which is essentially what you're saying to some degree. There's this argument that really, as cool as it is to them, it's 1 week. And then they go off and then start a charity and then say, oh, we're raising money for Africa. But the thing is, it's almost like leveraging or taking advantage of poverty. It's almost like it's like those pictures with the babies with, snot dripping down their noses. But that's what people find authentic about Africa. But there are other sides of Africa beyond the poverty.
Well, so two things I think I want to unpack here is that, well, when you say rural, I don't think rural means poverty. I think rural can be just that it's not in an urban area, right? So it doesn't mean that they're poor. It just means they live a more simpler life, right? You have rural communities in India. You have villages in the UK, right? Of course, they're different because some of them have more infrastructure. But actually, and I have gone to rural, in India, you go to rural India, you live with them, and it's fine. You go, and so, even in Japan, they're like villages, right? And they have in Arashiyama, where I was in summer, like they have shrines and huts. I mean, it's not really a hut, but it's like temples and simple buildings. And for me, when I say rural, that's what I talk about. So
do you find that sometimes when the West is referring to Nigeria and Africa, they're calling some things like I just did poverty that is not poverty?
Well, there's that. The second thing I wanted to talk about as well is when you refer to when they come. Again, who is the tourism for? I think that you should develop tourism for the people that live in your country. Like you mentioned in your introduction, we have 250 ethnic groups, right? We need to know more about these ethnicities. I mean, just the last week, someone was telling me about in Cross River where there's a tribe, and I do not have the name right now, but the women speak a completely different language to the men. And I had never heard that before. They have a common language, but there's another language where the mother speaks to her daughter in a completely different language to what the father speaks to his son. I only found that out last week because
and I'm just finding out now.
Exactly. And so for me, it's also about when we talk about the tourist, who is the tourist? I think there's a space for domestic tourism, there's a space for continental tourism, and then there's a space for international tourism. But we always look to develop for the international.
Right.
But it should be about who we are as a people, and then anybody can come and enjoy that.
Right. I love it. I love it. We had like a lot of things that we wanted to talk about.
Of course, so much.
There was your bracelet that I saw. And I was like, what's that orange thing? And why do you wear it every single time I see you? This is
true. It's
Tell us about that.
It's a Zonta Lagos One bracelet that says no to violence against women. And I think it's about, Zonta is a charity that is focused on empowering and advancing the cause of women. And that's actually what took me to Japan. There was the international convention. And really what's about is we're coming up with this 16 days of activism from November 25th to December the 10th. And it's talking about saying no to domestic violence, to sexual violence, to emotional violence against women and girls. And it's just trying to create awareness for that. And so this is a reminder and a conversation starter, I think, as well, that people should know more about what Zonta does, but also to know that there should be zero tolerance to any type of inequality, gender inequality, but also violence against women. Yes.
We have to round up, but I have so much to ask you.
Okay.
I'm going to sneak in one more question.
Okay, that's fine.
I'm just going to sneak it in. Whenever people talk about saying no to violence against women, we've said it enough that men are now saying, I'm sorry, the fact that we don't talk about it doesn't mean that it doesn't happen. But putting culture, because there are some cultures where violence against women is somehow shrouded as something to be proud of. There are northerners who apparently say that it is a thing of pride. Like apparently a northern wife would say, if he didn't beat you, he didn't love you. Now we know that there are gross inequalities, and we know that culture sometimes is a mask for a lot of those things. But where's the divide between talking about saying no to violence against women in a completely general way that just sounds like you people have come again, to narrowing down to the specific woman and what the challenges are, like what are practical things, because there's mental, there's emotional, but then some people don't even admit that there's violence, that they're being abused in any way mentally or emotionally, because sometimes you don't even know that it's happening. So how can you actually tackle this? Like, what practical things can you do besides, say, for instance, doing a conference or doing awareness?
Of course.
What trickles down to the person?
Yes, and I think that's really what Zonta tries to do in Lagos, and what we try to do in Nigeria as well, is saying that we're looking at the society. Again, it's about societal change. So you look at three levels. You look at the boundary of the society, you look at the boundary of the family, and then you look at the boundary of the individual person.
Right.
And so we have interventions to tackle, advocacy in terms of awareness, in terms of the family, talking to, parents, talking to young girls, talking to them about how family life should be, about how to create a safe space. But also the individual, it's saying that this is not right, but it's not enough to just say something isn't right. It's like, if this is happening, these are the numbers you can call. These are the people that can support you. We also have interventions we have interventions in Makoko. It's one of the communities we've adopted, and Elegwishi, and we have trained people that are trying to deal with this. But just very quickly, I wanted to talk about what you said about culture. I think what we have to also realize is culture is a way of life. It's how people have grown and advanced as a people. We have cultures all around the world that have realized that some practices are wrong, some practices need to be changed over time. And so I think there really needs to be a lot more work on awareness creation, but also a lot more work on educating men and women. Because to be honest, in a lot of these cultures, it's the women that perpetrate these grievous practices through generations. So it's really not just men. Yeah. It's, and like you said, men feel like sometimes it's like there's this war against men. It's more about saying, how are women also aware of what the culture is about? How do we develop our culture? So when we talk about development, how do we enhance our culture as well?
There's so much in there.
Too much.
There was a project.
Yes.
You have a project. Can we run through that really quickly? This project.
Right. Yes. So Tiwa Tiwa is a project that we did, Red Clay Advisory, in partnership with a white space creative agency. So they run the block party. Okay. That on Lagos Island, and the block party is really looking at celebrating the best of our culture, a community street tourism, street festival. But what we also did was we had the interactive sessions to say that, okay, we're coming to this space. Do we understand Afro-Brazilian heritage? Do we understand Afro-Brazilian culture? And so we had different sessions where I spoke and led panel sessions on culture. How do we actually document our heritage? What are the challenges we have in that? But also public space, right? So there's also a relationship between when you have community, public spaces, and then we had the Afro-Brazilian communities also come and share their stories. We had an exhibition that I also did with the CBD Institute, the Memory Project, again, looking at different stories of families. So looking at the families in these communities and saying, how have they evolved since they went to Brazil and come back? What are their what's their culture, what are their practices, and what's happening now? And then we also had Kitchen Butterfly prepare some food, some cuisine, and also did some research, again, into showcasing, really like just taking like a microscope, no, not a microscope, a magnetic, what is it?
Like a close-up.
A close-up,
Yes, do that.
That's it, yeah. A close-up in saying, okay, let's really focus into what this culture, what are their foods about, what do they do? And so that was very popular. And then we also had a tour, again, to show people just about Lagos Island, but also, like, you think Lagos Island, we think it's Yoruba, right? But there's so much, there's so much else in the architecture, in the buildings, in the food, in the music. So yes, that was a success. Okay,
so clearly we can sit here and continue talking.
We can.
But we have to round up. Okay. But we round up with this fun segment that we like to call a rapid fire.
Okay.
So you can't really think too much.
Okay, that was.
You weren't expecting that.
I wasn't expecting that.
Okay, so rapid fire questions, and they're really random. So there's nothing deep about it. Just literally blurt out whatever the answer is.
Oh, this is not good. I'm ready.
All right, question 1. Are you ready?
Yes.
Brace yourself. If you could get yourself anything right now, what would you get?
A horse.
A horse?
Yes.
A horse?
A horse.
Ah. Okay.
I used to ride, but I haven't ridden in a while, and I'm starting to go back into it. It's a horse.
Right.
Don't ask.
If you could live in another country for the rest of your life, and you can't travel, like that's the only country that you can live in, where would it be?
Tanzania.
Really?
Yes. Because I have Zanzibar with the waters on one side, I have Dar es Salaam with the city side, and then I have Arusha, which has the Serengeti on the other side. You can always look at Mount Kilimanjaro. So I have the whole world, really.
Everything,
Yeah.
everything. I love it. Okay, if you could sit in front of the president now,
The president.
the president, any president, don't worry,
Okay.
but the president. Let's start with the.
Yes.
And tell him one thing that you think would literally change the course of the country.
Yes.
What would it be?
I would say one thing we need to have is a vision for our country and a sense of national identity.
It's like you were prepared.
Well, that's something that I always
That
think
you
we
always
don't
think
have.
about, yeah.
We need to have a vision.
Yeah.
We are going this way.
Yeah.
A leader needs to show the way.
Yeah.
One vision.
Yeah.
That's all we
Yeah.
need.
Okay.
And within that, build national identity. Who are we as Nigerians?
Right. If you could study something else,
Yes.
if you could have done your PhD in something else,
Yes.
what would it have been?
Like I mentioned earlier, I wanted to do another PhD actually. I wanted to do a PhD in animal psychology, horses. I wanted to understand horses better and their psychology. I really wanted to do that.
I think you might be weird.
And my mom was like, no. No. Animal psychology. I find that animals are powerful and I
Right.
wanted to understand. And also because
Yeah.
I'm going on, but I know that they're not as bound by expectations as we are. I went on a safari in Kenya a while ago and I just loved how animals were just truly who they are. And I mean, there's a reason why we humans keep going to,
Yeah.
farms and safaris. There's something therapeutic about nature. So I wanted to understand how animals think.
Right.
How as our basic human animalistic nature,
Yeah.
who we are, what we are about.
Yeah.
And so animal psychology is and
That
horses in particular.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So I feel like if I asked you what animal would you be?
No, if I had to be any animal,
Yeah.
I would still be a human. But if not, then I'll be a dog,
Really? Not even a horse?
not a horse. Because horses are beasts of labor. Unless you're lucky enough to be pets. Whereas dogs are usually pets and people of the world. I mean, I have a dog, I love my dog. If I had a horse, I want to ride it like 4 hours a day. That's a lot of work.
That's a lot of work.
That's a lot of work.
Right,
yeah.
right. I love it. I love it.
Yeah.
Okay, we have to round up
No
now.
problem.
Thank you so much, Adu. Thanks
Thanks.
so much. This was lovely.
Thanks for having
Thank
me.
you. Thank you. All right, so stick around. We will be right back.
My name is Oluremi Da Costa. I'm the MD of Red Actors. I am a Brazilian descendant in Nigeria and I live in here in the Portuguese Brazilian community. When slave trade was abolished, our ancestors returned to Nigeria, Lagos, and then they settled at the eastern part of Lagos Island, today which is known as Bokwaguda. So the community has developed over the years, and this is what our ancestors has made the community look like. We have opened the community up for tourism, and we are expecting a lot of visitors to come in to have a taste of some of our Brazilian dishes, to see some of our Brazilian family houses, some historical sites, and then many more.
And that's our show. Don't forget to follow us on social media. We are on Instagram at HOTMTV. We are on Facebook at HOTM Heart of the Matter. And we are on YouTube at HOTM Channel. See you next week.